Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next instalment of the Naturetrek online roadshow. So welcome back to those of you who've joined us for the last few weeks, or even the last few years, actually. So we've actually been running our online roadshows now for the last 3 consecutive years. It's been a pleasure to introduce you to so much wonderful wildlife and so many of the places that we love over those past 3 years, as you've welcomed us into your living rooms. But we've also now started doing our in-person roadshows again for the first time in a few years. And starting in a couple of weeks' time, we will be covering the length and breadth of the country, introducing ourselves in person, as we do love nothing more than to speak to you in person as well. So at the end of this, you will be sent a link, and with that, it will have all the dates for both our in-person and online roadshows as well. So please do join us. But this evening, we will be speaking to you about Africa. So Africa is a continent that is very close to my heart. It's probably my favourite continent to travel to. The diversity is just absolutely incredible, and hopefully will inspire you with a little bit of that this evening. So my name is Georgie. I'm Naturetrek's tailor-made manager. So I look after all of our bespoke private holidays at Naturetrek. So we cover all of the countries that you'll hear about this evening, but we also cover some sort of off the beaten track destinations as well. So if you're ever interested in organising anything on a private basis, or perhaps if the dates don't suit you for our group tours, then please do get in touch with myself or our tailor-made team, as we'd love to put something together for you. So as I say, this evening we will cover a wide range of countries in Africa. We will start off with Alison Steele, who works in the Naturetrek office with me. She will be talking to you about Uganda this evening, from shoebills to gorillas and everything in between. We will then pass over to Oliver Smart. Oliver is one of our most popular leaders. He leads a lot of our photography holidays. He's a photographer himself, and he will be speaking to you about Madagascar this evening and the weird and wonderful wildlife to be seen there. We'll then take a 10-minute break at about 8:15, where you'll have the chance to go ahead and get a cup of tea and just have a small break there, before coming back at 8:25, when my colleague Ben Chappell will be speaking to you about Kenya. So very excitingly, Ben is actually in Kenya at the moment, so he's coming live from there. He's currently working on a wild dogs project for ZFL, and hopefully he'll be able to inspire you with his tales of the bush there. And then to end the evening, we will be following up with Dave Jackson, who will take us to our first country in West Africa. So again, that's going to be completely different from everything else that we'll hear about this evening. Dave, again, is one of our very popular tour leaders. He leads to St. Lucia in Scotland and in the Gambia as well, which I believe is one of his favourite destinations that he's actually just returned from. So it's still very fresh in his mind. We'll then end the evening with some question and answer sessions. But please do pop your questions in the box throughout the evening, as we will do our best to answer these throughout the evening as well. But at the end of the evening, we will answer them in person, hopefully give you some more in-depth answers there. So please do keep your questions flowing, as we'd love to be able to help with those as well. So without further ado, I will pass over to Alison, who will start with Uganda. Here you go, Alison. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Georgie. Let me just get my presentation up for you. Okay, so as Georgie mentioned, I'm one of Naturetrek's staff members. I'm one of the operations managers there. I've been working at the company for approximately 8 years now, and I look after a variety of different destinations, of which Uganda is one of them. So this evening, I'd like to share a little bit with you about some of the wildlife that you can find during a visit to Uganda. So Uganda is located in East Africa, neighbouring with Kenya, Rwanda, the DRC, South Sudan, and Tanzania. Among the areas we visit are particularly down to the south and west of the country. These hold much of the country's iconic wildlife that people typically want to see, including places such as Lake Maburu National Park, Bwindi, Queen Elizabeth National Park, Chibali, Bodongo Forest, and Murchison Falls. It's worth noting that at the moment, due to recent circumstances, Queen Elizabeth National Park is not currently able to be visited, but we do hope that that will change soon. Many people are often very surprised by how green Uganda is. Although it does have typically wetter and drier seasons, it can rain at any month, so it does make it a very lush place to go and visit. So as you're going through the country, you'll often see very sort of tropical forests, very green, lush, and lots of lakes as well. And these provide habitat for wildlife in various different ways. There are 10 different national parks in the country, 12 wildlife reserves, 13 wildlife sanctuaries, and 5 community management areas that are overseen by the Uganda Wildlife Authority, as well as numerous private concerns as well. So getting straight into the wildlife, one of the main species of mammal that people will want to go and see when they're in Uganda is the mountain gorilla. These live primarily in Bwindi forest down in the southwest. Each family group is usually led by a dominant male silverback. Even on 4 feet, they can stand at over 5 feet 5 inches tall, and the males can weigh in at 180 kilograms, which is nearly 30 stone. Females about half of that, but that's still 90 kilos or nearly 15 stone, so they're pretty hefty beasts. The forest they live in, so the Bwindi forest, covers some pretty hilly terrain, and it's got some very dense undergrowth. It's often referred to as Bwindi impenetrable forest for this reason, and it's no wonder that gorillas have developed 16 different types of communication call to be able to get in touch with each other through the vegetation. There are around 12 gorilla families that are habituated to limited human contact, and every person's experience of visiting with a family will be different. One of the questions that are very frequently asked is, will I be able to manage a gorilla trek? And that's quite a difficult question to answer, because it really depends on what your idea of a long walk is, whether you have a good level of fitness, or how determined you are. Typically, the gorilla families are spread out throughout the forest, depending on where the food is, and which trees are in fruit in that particular season. Typically, a trek will start in the morning. You'll head to a ranger station, and you'll be divided into groups, primarily based on ability as much as they possibly can tell. But obviously, the gorilla families can be kind of moved from where the last position that they were known to have been in. Treks can vary anywhere from as little as about 30 minutes trekking right through to about 7 or 8 hours. Although more typical, 5 or 6 hours in the forest, including an hour with the gorillas, is pretty normal. It is hilly terrain, and you'll be walking along a mixture of forest tracks, as well as going off track with the rangers, cutting a bush track for you in front of them to get to where the actual families are. If you're a little bit unfit, you should probably expect to be a bit tired by the end of the day. But most people who can walk several miles in a day and have a bit of determination are more than capable of being able to undertake a gorilla trek. In extreme circumstances, there is a possibility of being able to arrange a sedan chair and arrange porters who can carry you, although obviously that does change the experience, but there are ways and means of getting people there who can't necessarily undertake the walk themselves. Most groups are made up of up to about 10 individuals, and in amongst the families there'll often be a number of youngsters, which can often be very playful and fairly mischievous. This particular young male was delighting in showing off for us, climbing up trees when he could, and then rather than climbing all the way back down to the ground, that's not quite enough fun. So he'd find a branch with a bit of bend and take a shortcut down. Around 50% of the remaining mountain gorilla population live in Uganda, so trekking does help support quite an important conservation effort there. Another great ape found in Uganda is the common chimpanzee. There's several places in Uganda where it's possible to trek to see them, so a number of different forest areas where these are found. They like to build nests up in the treetops by interweaving branches. These are most typically used overnight, but sometimes they'll use them during the heat of the day when they like to rest, particularly during the wet season. Like with the gorillas, the chimpanzees live in family groups, and they're very much at home in the treetops, although they will come down to forage and feed. Their diet is primarily vegetarian, but some of them do hunt, and they will also take birds' eggs and chicks, reptiles, and as well as some insects too. Uganda also has a number of other different primate species that can be seen there. Up to about 24 different species have been recorded, including Gareza and African red colobus. These particular Gareza colobus family were lounging around at the side of the road as we drove past. Other species include Debrazas and Lost's monkey, blue monkey, as well as patas monkey, which are thought to be among the fastest primates, but they only run using their fingertips, never their whole feet. Also have grey-cheeked mangabe as well. And then there are groups of red-tailed monkeys, and then troops of olive baboon. The males in the olive baboon have canines that are larger than a leopard, so pretty impressive, often used in communication and in displays of aggression. And then there are the vervet monkeys. This particular youngster was very inquisitive, trying to pick up different items off the floor and see if there's anything he could possibly eat. And there are also some nocturnal primates, such as poto and bush baby, that if you're heading out for a night walk or a night drive, that you might come across. It's also home to some large carnivores, particularly lions. In some areas, these have learnt to climb trees, so can be seen lounging around higher up on the branches. Other predators that are occasionally seen by our groups and other clients visiting are leopards, spotted hyena, or perhaps a smaller cat species such as African golden cat or African wild cat. Other typical species associated with African safaris live here as well, such as the African elephant. These mainly live in herds, either bachelor herds or herds with females and calves, often only overseen by an older matriarch. And then there are the buffalo. They're often followed around by various bird species that are hoping that for an easy meal where insects are thrown up by the buffalo moving through the grasslands. Zebra and giraffe are also possible to find in some places. And then you've got warthogs too. They might be seen grazing with their forelegs folded back, almost like they're bowing down, just to make it easier for them to reach the ground. And it's also possible to see them running through the grasslands as well, with their tails held high in the air. So two very different aspects of the same animal. Ugandan kob have very lovely white face markings. They are a type of antelope species, and the males grow these lyre-shaped horns. They might live in groups and herd sizes of up to 100 animals, and they are related to the waterbuck. Waterbuck also have males that grow horns, and this particular pair of male waterbuck were battling it out for mating rights. Waterbuck are also known to excrete an oily, smelly substance, which is thought to help with waterproofing of their coats. And another fairly typical African animal is the hippo, groups of which can often be found lounging around at the edges of the water, aiming to cool down. One of the collective names for a group of hippo is charmingly called the bloat, due to their shape and overall size. And it's also possible to potentially see a few more unusual species during a visit as well, such as these giant forest hog. These are the largest species of wild pig, and they can have tusks that go up to 35 centimeters in length. But they also need to have areas that have got dense undergrowth and vegetation, as they can't cope with prolonged exposures to sunlight. As well as mammals, Uganda has a huge variety of bird life as well, with over 1,100 species having been recorded here. That's roughly 50% of African bird species and around 11% of the world list. One bird that's very keenly sought after is the prehistoric-looking shoebill. These large birds breed in swampy areas. They feed mainly on fish, but also on amphibians and reptiles as well, and have been known to take small crocodiles. They often use a stealth hunting technique where they'll stand really still, wait for someone to come past, then lunge out and grab it with their large bill. Other stork species that you might potentially come across when you're out in Uganda as well include open-billed, saddle-billed, and yellow-billed storks, plus a species that's a little similar to stork, the African spoonbill. Can have mixed bird gatherings, particularly alongside big lakes and along areas where there's lots of fish. And these might include species such as marabou stork, which are fairly common, ibis, herons, egrets, and cormorants. Particularly around fishing villages, water birds will gather in some number, and other species that you might find around that area will include gulls, terns, and pelicans, such as the pink-backed pelican. Waders can also be found around the lakes and near the water channels, including species such as black-winged stilt, little stint, spur-winged and African wattled lapwing, and water thickney, which are similar family to the stone curlew. Hammercock are often also found along near the water too, where they're looking out for amphibians and small fish. Flocks of African skimmer can gather on the banks as well, and as the name suggests, they skim the water surface for food, using their protruding lower bills to scoop up anything that they find, so they can pick it up and eat it. Raptors are also quite common, and these may include species such as the black-chested snake eagle, the African fish eagle, bataleur, yellow-billed kite, and various different vultures. Among many people's favourites are the kingfisher, such as the pied kingfisher. These can typically be seen sitting on branches alongside water bodies, often heading out over the water, hovering, diving down, grabbing a small fish and heading back to the branch again. There's also giant kingfisher, grey-headed and woodland kingfisher, or perhaps the tiny jewel-coloured malachite kingfisher. And then we have the bee-eaters. These can include blue-cheeked, red-throated and white-throated bee-eaters, among others, as well as colourful species such as sunbirds, including red-chested and bronze sunbirds, where the males have sparkling iridescent feathers when they catch the light. Chiraco are also colourful birds, and the great blue chiraco is one of the most commonly seen, among other species that can be seen there too. And then there are various types of hornbill, including crowned and black and white cast hornbill. African pied wagtail are quite common in some areas. This one was investigating a motorbike wing mirror. I think it was slightly confused by its own reflection. Another widespread species is the eastern grey plantain eater. This particular pair were in Entebbe Botanical Gardens, and they could definitely be heard before they could be seen. As well as bright and colourful species, which can be much more conspicuous, as can the larger species, there are a number of smaller birds that might also be seen during a visit. Things such as speckled micebird, which are often in small groups, as are black-crowned waxbill. Then you have grey-backed Camanoptera, which are a bit more skulking and often find more in undergrowth and leaf litter, or perhaps something small like this little bronze mannequin. As well as mammals and birds, there's lots of other wildlife to look at as well, including insects and reptiles, such as this blue-headed tree agama. And if you're alongside a stretch of water, it's always worth keeping an eye out for a Nile crocodile, as you're never quite sure where these might pop up. In addition, there is a huge range of plant life as well. Botanical gardens in Entebbe have a selection of species, and many others can be seen while travelling around as well. Perhaps species such as this quite unusual looking jackfruit, or the brightly coloured coral bush. For those who are interested, it's usually possible to fit in a visit to one of the local villages as well, and people will often gather there to see you. They like to show off their traditional dances and songs, as well as perhaps a skillful local craft that they have regional variations of. They are a very, very friendly people, many of whom work very hard in challenging environments, with whole families or villages working cooperatively, such as in this particular fishing village. It's a wonderfully scenic country, and each visit will take in a variety of different habitats. There's 15% of forest cover in Uganda, so most visits will include some forest area. Lakes are often quite a common place to visit as well, and there's 165 different lakes in Uganda. Savanna and scrub also makes up another large area of land, with about 30% of the area being savanna grassland type area. And then there are channels and rivers, such as the Kazinga Channel, and also water bodies as well. And there's a few places as you're travelling around where you might see places where you can mark the occasion where you cross the equator, of which there are several points with the equator running right through the middle of the country. We operate 3 main tours to Uganda, one with a mammal focus, one primarily bird focused, and another with emphasis on photography. That's not to say that on the mammal trip or on the bird trip that you won't look at other wildlife as well. It's just more what the main focus is going to be during those particular group trips. During our tours, we stay at a variety of different lodges and hotels, such as lovely Mahogany Springs Lodge near Bawindi. This is our main base in this area, so particularly for those who have been gorilla trekking, you're most likely going to stay there if you travel with us. They've recently added a spa area in there, so particularly good for anyone who's had a bit of an arduous gorilla trek or has got some sore muscles following that. You can have a nice massage to relax again after that. Private lodges in the Chibali area, and this is where one of the areas where it's possible to go chimp trekking. But if you're more inclined to the feathered variety of species, then it's also a good place to go in search of a green-breasted pitta. Rokabo Rock Lodge is one of the lodges fairly typical of the Lake Maburu area, but also quite indicative of the type of accommodation that you might stay in one of the more game drive type areas. Transport is usually in one of these Land Cruiser type vehicles where everyone has a window seat. And there's also a pop top to give increased viewing options for when you're on game drives. For some areas, though, it is possible to avoid the longer drives and take the option of a short plane ride, which can give you some amazing views across the countryside. So I hope this has given you a little bit of a flavour of the type of wildlife you might potentially see during a visit to Uganda. I'm very happy to answer any questions. You can get me at the Naturetrek office either on the phone or on my email address. And please do let me know if you would like anything answered. I'll be very happy to write an answer tonight on the web chat if you've got it. So I'm going to finish my screen share presentation just now, and then I'm going to pass you across to Oliver, who is going to take you to Madagascar.
Welcome, good evening to you all from Weston-super-Mare in Somerset. I'm wildlife photographer and naturalist Oliver Smart, and tonight I want to talk about Madagascar, and in particular a tour that I lead, the wildlife photography tour, which I last led in September this year. Now, I studied ornithology at the University of Birmingham back in my 20s, and also spent a fair few years bird ringing as well, so I've quite a good interest in the ornithological side. But with photography, I've really become accustomed to photographing wildlife in all genres, really. I run my own wildlife photography business, Smart Images. I've been guiding for Naturetrek now for just almost 4 years, covering a number of photographic tours, including also Gambia and Uganda photo tours, and many other tours wildlife watching in the UK as well. Now, Madagascar has a few different tours that we run, birds, mammals, a general one, and the photography ones as well, of course. Now, for those of you who don't know where Madagascar is situated, it's down in the southeast of Africa. It's the 4th largest island country in the world, and it's been separated from Madagascar from Africa for 165 million years or so. So the wildlife is completely changed and unique in this country. So the tour runs over 20 days, departing from London Heathrow, usually flying either via Ethiopia or via Paris in France. And this is the only tour as well to include the Singi limestone region to the northwest, which is a really special place to look for wildlife and indeed the incredible landscapes. Now, as you can appreciate, in Madagascar, travelling is long and can be arduous, and logistics can change. So even at short notice, don't be surprised if things do adjust slightly, but leave that to the guides and the tour leader, and you can enjoy the wildlife wherever we may end up being. That being said, there are so much wildlife opportunities here, and we'll access it by plane, by boat, and by transportation on the road, or track, as the case may be, covering some of the most important and interesting sites in the country. Certainly the western side, the east, the south, and slightly to the north. So as we arrive and acclimatise to the warm temperatures and the bustling city of Antananarivo, We then take an evening walk along the rice fields just to get acclimatized. For the size of the country, it only has a population of about 28.5 million people, which, per kilometre square is incredibly low. During our first evening, we just sat around watching the kids play football before we started to get involved with the landscape photography of the local paddy fields. And this is quite nice, actually, to be part of the community as well whilst you're travelling. I do enjoy this, although to a lesser extent to the wildlife, of course. I do love actually watching and enjoying other parts of the culture of my travel as well. So the first target really was to enjoy some of the landscapes and to really show off the vast paddy fields that you see in Madagascar. You can either use something like a HDR internally in the camera, high definition or high dynamic range photography, or indeed using filters as I did with this particular image, really blending the bright sky with a darker foreground. Our first lodge at Lukumbava is a place that we'll come back to several times during the trip as we move from one location in Madagascar to another. You usually come back to the central point and then back out again. That's where all the flights come and go from. During the mornings, we'll spend some time in the hotel grounds, just enjoying some of the local bird life, which can be particularly confiding. Indeed, these Madagascar manakins were really the best we found in the whole tour. Evenings then are spent planning and preparing our techniques and skills for the forthcoming days during each section of the tour. We then go to the west of the country, to Morondava, and go to the Avenue of Baobabs, one of the probably most famous avenues of trees in the world, I suspect. This is Grandidier's baobab, the largest of the 6 species that are found on the island. We start off in the early evening, catching that lovely warm evening light, usually perfectly blue skies, and then gradually we expand and wait for the sun to drop low enough that we can start to shoot the trees in silhouette. And one of the techniques that I like to try and teach the group is this starburst or sunburst effect, where the sun is bursting through the trees, giving you all the lovely rays of light. And you wouldn't think that even though there are quite a few people around, you can hide them quite well, actually. And also you can find little quiet spots to go and take your own shots and find your own nice landscapes and views. Once the sun's gone down completely and your eyes finally become accustomed to the night sky, we can start working the trees with the Milky Way in the background. And of course, after prepping well in advance, it should be fairly straightforward in capturing your shots. It's slightly more difficult than that, I appreciate. I'm sure you'll understand. But once you get the hang of it, it becomes a very addictive thing to do, working with the night sky and showing this beautiful Milky Way. We then head the following day on a long drive up to Karindi, and we stay in a fairly rustic but pleasant lodge and get straight out in the afternoon to look for forest wildlife. This is very much a dry, deciduous forest, and looking for things like the Torotoroka scops owl, named after the Malagasy of the sound it makes in the evening. I quite like shots like this, where you have almost like a naturescape with the wildlife shown actually in the landscape itself. Now, there are 7 species of owl in the country, of which you'll probably see 3 or 4 species quite well during your trip. Also in the forest during the morning, we'll look for things in the forest and on the forest floor. I managed to hear some rustling, a bit like a blackbird rustling. It actually turned out to be a white-breasted mesete or mesete. Endemism is incredibly high in Madagascar, with some 8 plant families, 6 bird families, 2 being endemic orders, and 5 primate families that live nowhere else on the planet. Some 117 species of bird exist nowhere else, a rate of 40% of endemism in birds, quite extraordinary. As the sun starts to dip again, we start looking for nocturnal wildlife. And almost every evening, I'll try and encourage the group to go out one last time for a night walk or an evening walk, looking for nocturnal wildlife. And of course, in Madagascar, there is loads. Things like this red-tailed sportive lemur, for example. As you can see, a little bit of flash has been used to light up the subject, and generally, again, another technique that I'll teach throughout the tour. Perhaps in this region, one of the most key species to look for is the fusa. Truly one of the highlights of the early part of the tour, of course, and it exists in the endemic family Eupleridae, which includes a number of perhaps falsely named mongoose species. It has a very cat-like appearance, and its fast speed and ability to hunt arboreally gives it an incredible foraging strategy in searching for lemurs, both small mouse lemurs and also up to the size of shafakas. And although the fossa is found around the circumference of Madagascar, it's most reliably found in Corindi. And the next day we head up to the Singi de Bamaraha. Now this is an area which takes about 9 hours drive. It's quite an interesting drive, but generally not a huge amount of wildlife. We cross a couple of rivers on some very rustic looking ferries and eventually arrive at the Malambolo River. To access this stunning viewpoint, obviously we take a canoe downriver and then climb up to the high point on the Petite Singi, which is one of the key highlights of this area. Now, I love photographing wildlife from boats and canoes, where the silence, the low perspective, and just the beautiful surroundings really embrace you. Along this river journey, we took about 2 or 3 hours. We just gently meandered along the river to our sort of debarkation point, where we could then go for a walk up into the Singi, Madagascar pratincoles. Now, ironically or strangely, Madagascar pratincoles aren't actually endemic to Madagascar. They're actually found also in eastern and southern Africa, but they actually only breed in Madagascar. So they're a Madagascar sort of breeding endemic, if you like. As you climb up the Petite Singi, it's quite an arduous, fairly tough going. You need to be fairly fit and healthy for this. It takes us several hours to walk around and to explore and to take some nice landscape images. And we also visit the Grand Singi the following day as well. The hotel nearby, the Le Soleil de Singi, is a very luxurious hotel, good food, a nice pool, and good views as well. We also look for nocturnal wildlife during the day at roost, things like Madagascar nightjar. These are often seen at night, often in sometimes good numbers as well. But generally speaking, during the day, they can be quite tricky to find. This was the only one we found easily during the daytime. Another technique I like to try and teach clients is also about this sort of blurred bokeh, looking through vegetation and foliage to frame the subject nicely and to make it a bit more creative than just a bird sitting on a rock. At night, again, we spend some time in the hotel grounds. Perhaps if we haven't got opportunity to go out into the forest or into the local habitat, we'll stay in the local grounds, working with some nocturnal wildlife. The chameleons often come out at night as well. So this is Oosterlet's chameleon, or Malagasy giant chameleon, and can be found throughout the island in almost all habitats. It can be very effective to use flash in this case, completely blowing the background black, but having lovely detail. In between our journeys to and from Tana, we get a chance to visit the lemur park in Tana itself, where they have lots of lemurs being rehabilitated, including cockerel shafaka. This one has got a tiny baby. I definitely have a soft spot for lemurs and can spend just hours watching their antics. From Tana, we then head south to the far southeastern part of Madagascar to an area called Barenti. You drive through a huge area of sisal plantations before eventually arriving at this beautiful little lodge called Barenti Lodge itself, where in the morning we'll go out and look for Varro's shafakas and ring-tailed lemurs, climbing up the spiny forest to bask in the early morning sun. This is named after Jules Varro, the French historian and ornithologist. Ring-tailed lemurs are perhaps my favourite of all. Certainly, if I was ever going to have a pet, I probably wouldn't, but I would have a ring-tailed lemur for sure. They love this habitat, only found in the south and southwest of the island, living in large troops, looked after by a matriarch, a female or females, with a grand of youngsters amongst them. The lemur comes from the Latin lemur, meaning ghosts, partly because of strange calls, their nocturnal habits for many species, reflective eyes, and also sometimes that's the way they look as well. While spending time on photography tours, we tend to not rush around just ticking off species all day long, which is I find much more enjoyable, in fact, because you can really study and watch wildlife. Here at Madagascar Kestrel, we spent some time just waiting for it to do something. And that's the thing with wildlife, it doesn't always do exactly what you want it to do straight away. This is a Madagascar Kestrel, and finally, after about 15-20 minutes, it started a wing stretch and tail stretch with a lovely, perfectly blue background and a nice spaced out spiny forest tree. Now, wildlife in Madagascar isn't particularly shy. A lot of it's quite confiding. In fact, the giant kuas around the Barenti Lodge are fairly easy to approach. Often found on the grounds, foraging for insects and seeds and small vertebrates, but also can climb up into the trees, partly due to the fact it's reversible third toe, allowing them to scramble around like cuckoos can do. They're also a member of the cuckoo family, Cucullidae, possibly from the Asian ground cuckoos. Of course, Madagascar once was joined to Asia as well. During the day, we'll also look for roosting lemurs. These are grey-brown mouse lemurs, actually 4 of them in this picture. One's looking the other way and its tail is wrapped around the face of the one in the front. It's almost as if to say, don't say a word, you're going to be spotted. Thankfully, we'd already been spotted. And even though despite very small field of view and narrow view of these mouse lemurs, it was nice to get quite an interesting shot looking through the vegetation. Of course, much of wildlife here, is certainly if it's nocturnal, is going to try and hide during the day. One of the 4 species of owl we spotted was white-browed owl. We saw these more often at night than during the day, but this was a magical opportunity to capture one actually during the day at roost. And wildlife never ceases to amaze me with the opportunities for images that you can take. Now, with this trip in particular, you have the availability of a UK wildlife photographer, of course, a naturalist, and also our local Malagasy guide, and of course the local reserve guides as well. So you have 3 experts on hand to help you with anything you need. But perhaps the most famous and important thing to look for and to work with during your time in Burundi is, of course, to photograph the Varroa shafakas dancing, leaping and jumping around as they go to roost in the evening. Using the best conditions for light and the angles and catching them backlit with dust and sand being kicked up by their feet was a real great opportunity to spend with these species. Quite different to the ring-tailed lemurs, they walk around on all 4s with their tail nonchalantly waving above their heads and above their backs. I do love the Varroa shafakas jumping around. We then spend one evening back in the spiny forest. I like to take the clients out again on an extra excursion to really get immersed in that sort of nocturnal experience. I'm using, in this case, a 15mm fisheye lens to almost create this appearance of the trees bending over. These are two families of trees. They are Laudia, round-leaved, and Dideria, heart-shaped leaf spiny trees that are coming into the scene here. And then you've got the Milky Way, of course, in the background. Quite an experience. And also, whilst we're there, we'll be looking for wildlife at night as well, using full flash to light the subject. We'll use a torch just to get our focusing right, and then obviously capturing the wildlife as best we possibly can. So things like owls and nightjars, other roosting birds, reptiles, amphibians, and some invertebrates as well. So back from Burundi, we head back to Tana again, and then straight out to the east side of the country, beyond the plateau and to the wetter rainforest, where you'll find perhaps the most iconic invertebrate on the island, and perhaps even in the world, perhaps, the giraffe weevil or giraffe-necked weevil. Males and females are sexually dimorphic, this being a male with a longer neck, sometimes 2 to 3 times longer than the female. And bear in mind, the insect's only 2.5 centimetres in length, quite extraordinary little things as they're flying from leaf to leaf. Again, in the evening, we'll go out on forest walks looking for nocturnal wildlife. Here we have a lowland streaked tenrec. These are a real favourite for their cuteness, their difficulty to find, and their slightly unusual appearance. They're actually a diverse family showing convergent evolution, similar in many aspects to hedgehogs and other mammals. They have the largest litters, up to 32. Some of the more camouflage wildlife, we look for lots of reptiles during the day and at night. This is the southern flat-tailed gecko, or also known as the mossy leaf-tailed gecko. The frilling around the body and the legs here they're called dermal flaps, helping it to really blend in to its surroundings. Up to 20 centimetres in length, they're quite large for the reptiles in Madagascar, and therefore fairly, I would say, easy to spot, but when you find one, they're fairly large and easy to work and take photographs. Now, of course, you can't go to the wet rainforest without hearing and without seeing, in particular, the wonderful indri. This monotypic single species in its genus are found in these wet rainforests to the east. It comes from the Malagasy name meaning "there it is," which was actually translated from a French naturalist who thought the guide was saying its name and not stating where it actually was. They're quite large, up to about 72 centimetres in height. During the morning, they spend their time calling and responding to one another. Female-dominated groups, once again, can contain multi-generations of young. This is definitely one of the most exciting animals to find here, and listening for them at close quarters can be quite deafening, but can actually be heard up to 4 kilometres away. Our final stop to the far eastern side of the island, on the coast of Andasibi, is where we go to the Palmarium Lodge. We stay here for a couple of nights to explore for more reptiles and mammals in particular. This is a panther chameleon catching a grasshopper on the leaf, again using full flash. So I explain exactly how to do this, set it up nicely, and using your flash sync speed on your camera, and then of course you freeze that motion. We spend a lot of time with amphibians as well, where we find them. This is a very distinctive species with these rhomboid pupils, making it very easy to identify. Amazingly, this Madagascar reed frog, also called the powder blue reed frog, is actually interesting so much as it changes colour between nighttime and daytime. Sadly, though, due to its beautiful coloration and being very easy to look after, these individuals are often kept in captivity as well. But amazingly, quite easy to find at night, and then of course in the daytime they love to be along the edge of the main lake there. Perhaps one of the most fun things to watch, although we didn't actually see it hunting, was this Madagascar net casting spider. These highly specialized spiders have a wide field of vision, as well as being able to see in pure darkness. Rather than building a traditional web, they create a net which they throw over their prey at a great neck speed at sort of in a millisecond or so. And perhaps the most exciting find of all was this Brookesia species, this one of these leaf-tailed chameleons, one that's only been discovered as recently as 2019. It still has yet to be fully named, and is still going through that scientific process of identification, naming, and ecological evaluation. And I hope that perhaps by the time I return in 2025, I will actually know its proper name. But you can see here, compared to my guide's finger, how tiny this dear little chameleon is. And we found 3 one evening at the Palmarium Lodge. So certainly something that we would look for next time. And the other reason for coming to the Palmarium Lodge is to go looking for the Ii. Island, which is about a 10-minute boat trip away from the lodge, is a brilliant place to go and set up. You can't use flash here, but they use LED lights to help light the animals coming down to food. They're actually the large member of the lemur family, and actually the largest nocturnal primate in the world. Unfortunately, of course, they have been believed to be harbingers of evil and death, and often killed by local people. But thankfully, those myths are being dispelled, and they are pretty widespread actually through the country. And finally, this would finish on a nice image of one of my favourite images from the trip of the Roadshow. Really one of the highlights was that spending so much time with these lemurs in the south. Now, the next tour that I'm running to Madagascar for photography will be the 8th of September 2025. And if you have any further queries, of course, then obviously speak to me either during this presentation or afterwards, or indeed contacting Barney Jones at the Naturetrek office. Despite it being a photography tour, we still encountered 101 species of bird, 26 species of mammal, and 30 species of reptile. So thank you very much for listening. And as I mentioned, please get in touch if you'd like any more information. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking to you tonight about Kenya. And I am actually, as Georgie mentioned earlier, speaking to you from Kenya right now. I'm currently at the Impala Research Centre in central Kenya, in Laikipia County, where I am doing some work with the African Wild Dog team based out of the Zoological Society of London. Now, I'm going to be talking to you tonight not about any specific tours to Kenya, but instead I'm going to be talking to you about perhaps some ideas for tailor-made trips that you might be able to do to the country, especially if you've been on a classic safari in the past. Now, we all know about the Masai Mara in Kenya. It is rightly known as one of the most spectacular wildlife destinations in the world. But Kenya as a country has so much more to offer than just the Mara. Really, for mammal and bird watching in particular, it's amongst the very best countries on earth, perhaps the best in both those categories, and certainly in terms of the diversity and the experience that's on offer. Now, I'm going to start out by talking about Laikipia County itself. This is where I am right now, and it's probably the best place in Kenya for private safaris. And you certainly in this part of Kenya won't get anything like the same kind of crowds that you might in places like the Mara. But I would argue that the wildlife experience on offer is perhaps even more spectacular, certainly in terms of the diversity of species that are available. Now, the landscapes here are very, very different to the open grassy habitats that you might have seen if you visited the Mara. Laikipia is typically features these great big rocky outcrops, dry semi-arid bush, and river gullies and valleys. Really absolutely stunningly beautiful landscapes, and hide within it an astonishing diversity of wildlife. Perhaps the most abundant mammal that you will encounter in Laikipia is this. This is the Gunter's dik-dik, a really weird little antelope, tiny, tiny thing that's a staple part of the diet of most of the predators in the region. This particular species is really well adapted to dry conditions. That long, bizarre proboscis that they have is thought to be involved in reducing water loss. Bush hyrax is also a common species throughout Laikipia, as is reticulated giraffe. Laikipia is probably the best place in Africa to see what is arguably the most beautiful of all giraffe species. This is a species that's found in northern Kenya and other parts of the Horn of Africa. A plain zebra is found here too. This is obviously a ubiquitous species across a lot of safari destinations in Africa. But perhaps more excitingly, Laikipia is the best place to see Grevy's zebra, which is a highly endangered species. Perhaps only 3,000 or so of these beautiful horses left in the wild. It's the largest wild member of the Equidae family. Yeah, only a few thousand, and most of them are found in Laikipia. This is a picture of a couple of them in a typical Laikipia sort of semi-arid habitat. Beza oryx, another gorgeous ungulate, is well worth looking out for in this environment. And there are some wonderful birds too. This is perhaps the most ubiquitous. This is white-bellied go-away bird. Its call is a typical sound across a lot of the landscape here. African hoopoe is also common, as is von der Decken's hornbill. This is the commonest hornbill in this part of Kenya. Vulturine guinea fowl is abundant. This is a really beautiful bird, and you can see here how it gets its name with that really weird, slightly off-putting bare facial skin. Still a stunning species. Laikipia is a fabulous place to catch up with a huge diversity of carnivorous mammals. This is bat-eared fox, a species that has some of the best hearing of any mammal on the planet. And of course, the big cats. I mean, we couldn't be talking about Kenya without mentioning those. Laikipia is particularly good for leopard, has some of the highest densities in Africa. This is a big male that I saw last year. But perhaps the absolute holy grail of big cat sightings, not just in Laikipia, but not just perhaps even in Kenya, perhaps in the world right now, is the opportunity that Laikipia gives you to search for these guys, black leopards, melanistic leopards. There are probably 10 or so individuals now living in the wider Laikipia landscape, and in a couple of places, especially around a camp called Laikipia Wilderness Camp, you have a really excellent chance of catching up with these guys. I'm certain it's the best chance anywhere in the world. I know there are black leopards in India and parts of Southeast Asia, but right now there's nowhere more reliable to catch up with these just astonishingly gorgeous cats than Laikipia. Cheetah too is here in Laikipia. It's probably the hardest of the big cats to see, but there's always a chance, and there is a good population in the area. As there is of lion, of course, a stay in Laikipia, private safari here, you would be sure to track them down at some point over the course of a visit. I've included this picture because I actually took it this morning on an excursion out from the research centre. We were looking for wild dogs, which we didn't find this morning. Instead, we bumped into a pride of lions on what we think was a Grevy zebra kill, but it was quite hard to tell because they'd already munched up most of it. You can see this young male on the left has a very full belly. A really, really nice bonus to find these guys this morning. I mentioned wild dog. Of course, this is a species that I work on outside of my in my sort of normal day job. Up until a few years ago, Laikipia was one of the best places in Africa to see them in the wild. Sadly, in 2017, there was a massive outbreak of canine distemper virus, which wiped out pretty much the entire population just in the space of a couple of months. Really devastating. Happily, population is starting to recover now. It still hasn't recovered to the extent that Laikipia is a great place to see them, but there are still good opportunities. And in particular, a lot of the lodges around here have a relationship with the project that I work with, which allows them to get out and track the dogs, especially if they are in the area. And of course, as there are some of you will know, this is a very wide-ranging species. It's not always in the vicinity of any particular lodge. But if they are in the area, you can get out and track them. And this is actually what I spent pretty much my entire day doing here in Kenya. And this is another picture that I took just a few hours ago this afternoon. I'm very, very lucky after a long, long time of tracking and scratching the car up on acacia bushes. Eventually managed to find these dogs resting in a little glade. I've seen them countless times before, but the magic of encountering wild dogs never gets old for me. Laikipia is also one of the best places I know for night drives. Night drives, of course, are a great way of catching up with cats on the hunt. Again, this picture here of these two leopards I took probably not more than 2 hours ago. It was just as I was coming back into the camp where I'm staying. There's a mating pair of leopards right outside the entrance to the research centre. Fantastic. So I've seen lion, leopard, and wild dog today. And although that is a fantastic day, it's far from atypical for a safari in this part of the world. It really is a fabulous, fabulous place. A striped hyena is also pretty common around here. This is not an easy species to catch up with anywhere within its range. It's found through East Africa, North Africa, and into South Asia. Around here, though, I probably see them on 1 out of 2 night drives, often getting really good views. They sometimes come out during the day as well. Aardwolf too, the smallest member of the hyena family, is a regular species to find here in Laikipia. Again, across most of the rest of its African range, this is a vanishingly elusive species, a really, really tough one to track down. But here, it seems pretty reliable. And last year, I was very, very lucky. Managed to find an active aardwolf den, and by sitting very patiently next to the den, was able to get some really stunning encounters with these youngsters as they very curiously poke their heads up out of the hole. This is a possibly once in a lifetime kind of thing, but if it's going to happen anywhere, I think Laikipia is the place to try. Crested porcupine here, another sought after nocturnal mammal. This is white-bellied hedgehog. And here is me holding a white-bellied hedgehog. This turned out to be a little bit of a mistake because those spines are actually pretty sharp. My hand was quite sore for an extended period afterwards, but still cool to see the species up close. Now, perhaps the holy grail of night drives anywhere in Africa is this, the aardvark. Again, it's far from guaranteed, but I know of no other place on the continent where they're seen as regularly, at least in my experience, as here in Laikipia. A really bizarre and just wonderful, wonderful mammal to see. I'm going to move slightly south now to a place called Olpejeta, which is a conservancy still within Laikipia that many of you may have heard of. It's right in the shadow of Mount Kenya and presents some really beautiful views of the mountain when the weather is clear. Now, Olpejeta is probably most famous for its rhinos. There are wild rhinos, and I'll talk about them in a moment. But it's probably best known for being the home of the last 2 northern white rhinos on Earth. This is a subspecies that's extinct in the wild, and there are only 2 females left now, a mother and a daughter. And sadly, most of the attempts to use artificial insemination or cloning, they don't seem to be having the success that was hoped. So it's likely that these 2 individuals will be the last of their subspecies ever. So it was a moving experience to get to meet them, and that is an option for visitors to the conservancy. There are rhinos too out in the wild in the main reserve. Southern white rhino is there in good numbers. They were introduced to Kenya. They're not a native subspecies to East Africa. But black rhino too. And in fact, Olpejeta has the largest black rhino population of any reserve outside of Southern Africa. It's about 160 individuals, including a really healthy rate of breeding success. So if you visit Olpejeta, you've got a great chance of seeing young black rhinos, which is a real privilege. Sadly, It's a species that's hammered by poaching in so many parts of its range. They also have a captive black rhino called Baraka, who was born in the wild, but blinded in a territorial fight with another male, and he now acts as an ambassador for rhinos. And if you're very well behaved and very nice, you get the chance to hand feed him, which is a pretty wonderful experience. In particular, the skin behind his ears is infinitely softer than you could ever imagine the skin of a rhino being. Of course, there's lots of other wildlife in Alpegita, much of it a little bit more similar to the Masai Mara with these big open grasslands. This is Thompson's gazelle, Jackson's hartebeest, more reticulated giraffes, and some great birds too. This is black-winged lapwing, Corry bustard, the heaviest flying bird in the world. And this is northern white-crowned shrike, exploiting a leaky tap for getting a drink. And the incomparable grey-crowned crane. Lions too, of course, fairly easy to see here. It's got a very high lion density. And it's probably the best place in Laikipia, at least, to track down cheetah. Not as easy to see in the as in the Mara, but still a good chance if you come to Alpegita. At night too, good chance of things like serval. And in my experience, it's the best place I know of to try and find Zorilla, this really stunning, striking black and white member of the mustelid family, the same family as weasels and stoats. Now, moving a little bit further south into the foothills of the Aberdare Mountains, and you have a chance to find this gorgeous, gorgeous species. This is mantled guareza, otherwise known as eastern black and white colobus monkey. There's blue monkey too. This is a widespread species, but here they have these really luxurious fur coats that help keep them warm in the cold mountain environment. And one of the best places to stay in the Aberdares is this. This is the Ark Lodge. And this is a lodge in the low-lying rainforests of the Aberdare Range. And it's situated on a natural clearing with a natural salt lick that attracts a pretty wide variety of exciting mammals. And probably the most exciting of those, I know Alison mentioned these earlier, but this is giant forest hog. And I know that they're possible to see in Queen Elizabeth National Park, but I really think that if you are set on seeing the world's largest wild pig, the Aberdare Mountains are the absolute best place to go. It really is a remarkably easy species to see there, whereas in much of the rest of its range, it can be pretty elusive. And the males can weigh a couple of 100 kilos. They're chunky, chunky things. Here are some grey-crowned cranes in front of a little sounder of giant forest hog. Jackson's spurfowl is a special species of the higher altitude parts of the Aberdares. And this is Hunter's cisticola, which might not look like much, but has a gorgeous song that rings out across the forest in the early morning. Southern tree hyrax is also a very vocal species that you get at night. Some places they're incredibly tame, and this was one trying to steal a chip from me while I had lunch at a restaurant in the bottom of the Aberdare Mountains. Now, also in these kind of foothills, there are opportunities to find a really special mammal, a sort of mammal watcher's mammal, if you will. This is called maned rat. And although rats in general might not have very broad appeal, really this is one of the most bizarre, the most extraordinary mammals on the planet for me. They're the only mammal on Earth that makes itself poisonous by using substances from plants. So they chew on the leaves and bark of Canthera, the poison arrow tree, and then they lick this toxin-laced saliva onto especially absorbent hairs on their sides, and they turn themselves deadly poisonous. And it essentially makes it impossible for any predators to eat them. And they are remarkable and well worth the effort to find if you're in this part of Kenya. Now, I'm going to move now from this part of central Kenya, where you can see Laikipia still highlighted in red, down to the coast. The coast of Kenya is a really nice self-contained area where if you are thinking about a tailor-made safari, it's a great way of combining perhaps some pampering for the beach resort, along with a safari in Tsavo East, which is the first place I'll talk about, but then also these other destinations, the Arabuko-Sokoke Forest, and the Shimba Hills National Reserve. Now, Tsavo East is Kenya's largest protected area, It's particularly famous for these red elephants. The soil in Tsavo is this deep, rich red color. And when the elephants bathe in it, color gets transferred onto them, and they really do look pretty magnificent. Great for lions too. Tsavo is famous for the man-eating lions that plagued the construction of the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi under British colonial rule. Rainbow agama, stunning little lizard. Black-faced sand grouse is a common bird species in Tsavo, as is chestnut-bellied sand grouse. Black-headed lapwing, and this is Somali ostrich. So this is a different species to the common ostrich that is found across much of the rest of Africa. This species has this lovely bluish-grey wash to its neck, in contrast to the pink of the common ostrich. Desert warthog too, again a different species, and gerenuk, this very strange long-necked creature that almost looks like a photoshopped impala. This is Beza oryx as well, but this is a different subspecies to the one in Laikipia. This one is known as a fringe-eared oryx for reasons that are very readily apparent. Heart-nosed bat as well, a really lovely bat species that is common in these hot lowlands. Now, Watamu, the beach resort, is a great place with some fantastic places to stay if you are looking for a bit of comfort. I'm going to move through to the wildlife. Rest assured, these beach destinations are amongst the best in the world. But for me, slightly more interesting than that is that you often get white-bellied hedgehogs in the car parks and gardens of these hotels. And Watamu itself provides access to the Arabuko-Sokoke forest, which is the largest expanse of primary forest in the entire East African seaboard. It's a fantastic place for birding in particular. This is the Narina trogon, which is a widespread species, but easy to see in Arabuko. African wood owl, again. But perhaps the most sought-after bird here is this. This is the Sokoke scops owl. And this is one of Africa's smallest owls and is really only found in this one tiny patch of forest and a couple of other fragments further south. Mammal-wise, the golden-rumped elephant shrew or golden-rumped giant sengi, perhaps the size of a small rabbit, a really weird little thing that rustles through the leaf litter during the day. I'm just going to play this short video of Mida Creek, which is near Watamu, some of the best wader watching in the world. I'm not going to talk about all these species in this video, but the most exciting is probably the crab plover, these black and white birds that are the only members of their family and visit Watamu in great numbers. Let me see. There we go. And then just I realize I'm running out of time slightly, but I will whistle through this last little bit. This is an area of Kenya along the Tana River that's perhaps an option for people who want to get really far off the beaten track. In particular to two reserves, the Tana River Primate Reserve, which is this extraordinary thin ribbon of riverine forest, moist forest, almost rainforest, in the middle of one of the most arid parts of Kenya. And even more extraordinary is the fact that it supports two endemic species of monkey, the Tana River red colobus and the Tana River crested mangabe, both critically endangered species that can be tracked down in these forests. Now, if you hop across the river from the Tana River Primate Reserve, you get to the Ishak Bean Hirola Sanctuary, which is the only place in the world where the Hirola exists in its native range. This is probably the most endangered antelope left in the world. A really strange sort of bespectacled creature, almost an evolutionary relic. Great place for caracal as well, a really beautiful small cat, Somali galago, lesser kudu, eastern chanting goshawk, and golden pipit, a really nice range of birds. And finally then, I'm just going to end in the beach resort of Diani, which is in the very far south of Kenya. Again, a wonderful place for a beach holiday, but also provides access to a lovely little reserve called the Shimba Hills. The Shimba Hills, another patch of coastal forest like Arabuko, great place to see some slightly more elusive species again, like bush pig. This is the small-eared greater galago, a type of bush baby. A crowned eagle, Africa's equivalent of the harpy eagle, which often eats monkeys, including this one, the Angola colobus. another really striking primate. And Shimba Hills is most famous as being the only place in Kenya where you can see sable antelope. There are about 60 of them here, and although they take a bit of tracking down, it's well worth the effort to find this beautiful species. Okay, thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we've given you some ideas for maybe how to visit when you're off the beaten track next time you're thinking of a safari. So thank you, and I'll look forward to taking any questions a bit later.
Let's start at the first slide then. Hard acts to follow there with Uganda, Madagascar and Kenya, but I'll do my best with this tiny African country, the Gambia. As Georgie said at the beginning, I've just come back. 13 of us went out to the Gambia and only 6 of us returned. Let me start my video. Yeah, I'm sure we got there. Yeah, so only 6 of us returned after 13 of us went out. 4 people went off to Senegal, another 2 to the coast, and 1 adventurous photographer joined the trip going up country with Andy Bunton, who presented last month, for anyone that was looking on at that one. Now, if you're wondering where to go, why the Gambia when we've seen such fantastic wildlife in the other countries we've seen tonight? Well, it's just a 6-hour flight from the UK. It's glorious weather is guaranteed. It has amazing wildlife. And I think the Gambia is the perfect choice. There it is. It's like a crooked finger pointing into Senegal, which surrounds it entirely on both sides. And Naturetrek do a number of trips to the Gambia, a number of tours. The first one, the Gambia in Style, which runs from November to April. Which is the most popular, of course. And there's also a photography special with Oliver. And a new one for next year, the Gambia in Style at Christmas. And I'm assured that the only bulbuls you're likely to see are the avian kind. The trip that I mentioned that one of our guests last week is on is the 12-day bird watching trip tour up country, where you're likely to see one of the best waders in the world, Egyptian plover. And there's also a tailor-made. If you wanted to do your own thing, I'll be leading a trip in exactly 2 weeks' time with the Northampton Bird Club. And we'll be doing a shorter version of the up country, should I say, not upriver, up country version. So tonight I'm concentrating on the Gambia in Style, Mandina Lodge, where we stay. And if you're using the pool at all, you're bound to see the pied kingfisher. Also around the grounds, beautiful sunbird. Some really colourful birds you're likely to see without ever leaving the lodge. Scarlet-chested sunbird, and not so bright as all the other sunbirds. This is mangrove, and it's had 3 names in the 23 years since I've been visiting the Gambia. But mangrove seems to sum it up nicely, and I hope that one sticks. Also in the grounds of Mandina Lodge at the right time of year. So some of the birds I'm showing you here aren't there to see on every tour, but most of them are fairly widespread. This is the village weaver, the male here with the black head and red eye, just preparing for some nest material. Also in the grounds is red-cheeked cordon bleu, and that can often be seen in company with red-billed firefinch, another tiny little finch. This bird isn't as dangerous as it looks. It's a western plantain eater. That's one bird that you're most likely to see as well, and very close. Also, it's not just about birds, but there are other mammals, green vervet, which we've already had tonight, and patas monkey, also seen in the Gambia, quite scarce. and very shy, as they are still hunted. And we were lucky enough to have a baboon invasion last week. This is the boardwalk that goes between the lodges, and the ground staff are usually very quick to clear them because they can be quite destructive. But that's not easy to do when you've got a group of nature watchers. So they let them stay and feed, and they didn't do us any harm whatsoever. In fact, they walked right past us. So they barely give you eye contact. One species that you're not likely to see in Mandina and is becoming extremely scarce in the Gambia, unfortunately, is this western red colobus. This was a photo I took a number of years back at the Senegambia Hotel, where you could virtually sit next to them on the lawn, but they seem to have disappeared from a lot of the coastal strip. They've been outnumbered by the vervets, which there's Bigillo Forest, which is misnamed monkey forest, monkey grounds. But anyway, people go there and they're sold peanuts to feed the vervets. So they've got an upper hand really when it comes to food and numbers, and they've seemed to have driven these poor things out. But you can see them in other places. We saw them this week, a glimpse of them at the top of the trees in the Bonto forest. So they're still around, but they are endangered. A number of butterflies. We saw quite a few butterflies last week. That's orange acrea and citrus swallowtail. That one's just laying an egg. And also, if you're into your odonata, there's quite a few others, darters, skimmers, and other damsels that really could do with a decent field guide on. So the first morning in Mandina, we board the canoes. We're taken along the Ballon, or the creek. This is AJ, one of the expert guides. We go past the floating lodges, where we're likely to see birds such as reef egrets or reef heron, Goliath heron, and on the other scale is one of the smaller herons you're likely to see, and that's striated, which is roughly the size of this giant kingfisher, which they're very noisy and do frequent the lodge quite often. And we arrive at a village on the bank of the river, where there's a small industrial, I say industrial, it's a village industry collecting oysters, and they discard the shells, and the vultures come down to pick off the shells, see what's remaining in the shells there before the shells themselves are taken away to be used in construction. Crushed to make whitewash, and also used in building blocks. A bird you're likely to see anywhere in the Gambia, in fact, quite throughout Africa, is pied crow. And little bee eater, another splash of colour, which is a very popular species to see, along with swallow-tailed. That shouldn't give you too much trouble seeing those either. And not swallow, beg your pardon, not a bee eater. This is a swallow. It's Fanti Sawwing. They are reasonably numerous, although you don't often see them perched obligingly like this. And seen and heard quite frequently, Senegal parrot is a very small parrot with a very big voice. I often overlook bronze manakin. These are a tiny little finch. Flitter around, fly in and out very quickly, but it's good to get them perched where you'll appreciate the coloration on them. This is orange cheeked waxbill, another in the same family, waxbills. And if you're very fortunate, you might come across a Class's cuckoo with this really gleaming iridescent green plumage. And one bird that's very popular, and why wouldn't it be, of violet turaco, and often seen perch, but when they fly, you get this amazing blaze of color. Looking above, you often hear the pied crows making a fuss, and here's one escorting a Bedouin's snake or eagle off the premises. Around the lodges and in the palms, this is African palm swift. And sorting through the little swifts, you could be rewarded with the mottled spinetail. Osprey, Western osprey, if you like, given its new name. They're quite common up and down the river. And these birds overwinter, our winter in the west of Africa. And these birds could well have bred in Scotland or even England. So 3 hours flies by, believe me. We go out on the boats about 7:30 and come back around about 10:30, 11 o'clock and have a late lunch, late breakfast, beg your pardon, and brunch. And then you've got the rest of the afternoon to go back to your lodge or share the swimming pool. When I say share, you're likely to have it be shared with a pied kingfisher or a white-throated bee-eater, which come down to splash bathe before going off and doing what bee-eaters do. Yeah, there's also plenty of sunbeds where you can laze around or take a snack before going on the afternoon walk or late afternoon walk. It's also a good opportunity to get to grips with all the pigeons and doves around the lodge. This one's the largest speckled pigeon, which I'm sure if you've been to Africa before, you've seen many of these. Also, red-eyed dove. This is quite common, and it tells you its name when it's calling. It's a very dull-looking dove, but quite large, and the eye isn't particularly descriptive of the species. As this isn't a red-eyed dove. This is an African mourning dove, but the eye, as you can see, is much brighter. And when seen well with the tail splayed or when it takes off, it does have white tips to the tail, unlike the red-eyed dove. Laughing dove, very common and expanding their range, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if this bird didn't arrive in the UK and form colonies as the collared dove did some years back. This is one of the two species of wood dove. There's no neck collar, which, apart from its small size, does distinguish it from the other doves, or most of the other collared type doves. Black-billed wood dove, as I say, it's descriptive of the bird. Now, you would have thought this is red-billed wood dove, but it isn't. It's blue-spotted. And you can see there the rusty wings. That's very obvious when it takes flight. Now, you could well be serenaded by wattle eyes. This is the male with the white throat and the female with the brown throat, and this is called is now called brown-throated wattle eye. And if you sit outside your lodge and you're extremely lucky, yellow-crowned gomelette might pop out. They're very vocal, not often seen like this, but they're not particularly shy either. Gambian epileptic fruit bats, they will roost in the mangrove next to the lodges. And we're seeking out quite a large bat. Now, as I mentioned, we go for a walk, optional walk in the afternoon when it's getting cooler. And there's some water tanks, which is a favorite hideout for these African paradise flycatchers. This one, the male with the long tail streamers. Excuse me. Also a bird that likes to linger in the shadows is snowy-crowned robin-chat, well worth seeking out. And this agama lizard took up residence in one of the termite mounds. We saw that each day we walked past, and last April's trip. The place we're walking to is known as the Mud Flats. This is tidal. There's some ladies collecting firewood from the mangroves. You're likely to see Senegal thickney here. And this one looks as though it's keeping an eye of whatever's flying above. And that could be grey kestrel. That seems to have grabbed some lunch from somewhere. Or Rufous nape falcon. This was redneck falcon, but it's been split from the ones that you're likely to see on the Indian subcontinent. A yellow-billed kite is so common that I nearly forgot to put it in the talk tonight. There's also black kite in there, but they're far outnumbered by the yellow-billed kites. Also a bird expanding its range with two recent discoveries in the UK. This is now black-winged kite, was black-shouldered kite, but now known as black-winged kite. And at the Mud Flats, various birds come down to drink or feed, including African wattled plover. I know we've seen this before this evening, but it's worth seeing again. Fabulous bird, unmistakable. Hammerkop, another popular bird, a small heron with this peculiar shaped head. Always popular amongst the guests. As is yellow-billed shrike, which can often be seen around the drier areas, which is farmed right next to the wetland area. On one day we take a bus out, we go through Brikama, which is the most populous town or city in the Gambia, until we come to the south of the country at Khartoum. We could well pass Shikra on the way in roadside bushes, and on the wires, lizard buzzard with this chunky legs and feet and the black stripe down its throat. Also anywhere where there's cattle, yellow-billed oxpecker, we stop to try to find. And we were fortunate last year to see this bird, which was a new bird for me and also to the guides. This is sulphur-breasted bush shrike. Any wetland areas likely to hold black-winged stilts. Two species of pelican, white pelican on the left and pink-backed on the right, the smaller pink-backed. And African jacana, anywhere where there are lilies, also known as the lily trotter. One of the few ducks in the Gambia is white-faced whistling duck. You can often hear flocks coming before you see them. And then again in the drier areas that are farmed, a rufous crowned roller. They'll pick off grasshoppers or anything they can find. One of my favourite Gambian birds, blue-bellied roller, and the unmistakable Abyssinian roller with its long tail streamers. If you go in November, December time, you could see northern red bishop. Coming into the new year, they've lost that plumage and they look like sparrows or buntings. They don't have any of this coloration, but this one on the left here is displaying and singing. Other raptors you might see is Lana falcon, and this one's dive bombing onto a yellow-billed kite. We then make it to the beach, where there's this little beach shack where we have a soft drink before walking up the beach. And this northern grey-headed sparrow has taken a drink out of a skull that's been screwed onto the side of the shack. Hooded vultures, looks like these two are sizing up to each other, but they're not really. Even vultures need love. A bird that should or could be familiar to you is whimbrel. And these birds have been geotagged, flying non-stop from Iceland, taking 4 or 5 days to get to the Gambia, non-stop, where they spend their winter, before flying back, making several stops on the way back before they reach their breeding grounds in Iceland. And greenshank also is another British bird that spends the winter there. But the speciality of this area is this little plover, similar to a Kentish plover, but this is white-fronted plover. They can be quite approachable at times. From there we have lunch, and then we go on to Tangi, a fishing village. And this really does fill your senses. The colour, the smell of the fish, the hustle and bustle, it's an experience not to be missed. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I do enjoy being there. Grey-headed gulls all circling overhead. But we're here to look for this used to be a royal tern, but now it's been split. This is West African crested tern, and the largest tern in the world, Caspian tern. Before we leave and make our way back to Mandina Lodge, where you've got the opportunity to take a dip in the pool before we meet up for dinner and the infamous Naturetrek checklist. Now that's the dining room right next to the pool. Another morning we go off in a different direction. This is Sana, another one of the expert guides, going past the stilted lodge on our way to Kembuje, where we should happen upon African darter, reed cormorants, or given the old name long-tailed cormorants. This is a young bird. And we were very fortunate to see this species, shining blue kingfisher. There's often lots of claims for this species, but they all more often turn out to be immature malachites with a black bill. This is a visitor of the rainy season. We got very close to this species. And also the larger kingfisher is blue-breasted, often heard and seen very well. When we reach Gambuje, we climb out of the canoes and walk along the dry area here, where the women have their farms, their small holdings, where they grow rice at this time of year, and then as soon as that's cropped, other plants, other crops are grown, peppers, chilies, and various herbs. But we're listening out for the small birds, the sunbirds. If they're making a row, we go and inspect to see what's causing them a little bit of a nuisance. But first of all, we look at other birds that are around. This is a long-tailed glossy starling. Once again, I'll make no apologies for showing a blue-bellied roller again, one of my favourite birds. And this ground-dwelling Namakwa dove, which will be familiar to anyone that's been to Africa. They're very widespread. Oh, aren't they gorgeous? Bearded barbets. They really are a picture. Quite often to see those at the top of fig trees, often in pairs too. And another barbet, one of the smaller barbets, this is yellow-fronted tinkerbird, which is often heard, frustratingly, 24 hours a day sometimes, but very difficult to pin down. But here it is. But this is the reason why the sunbirds are making such a fuss, as a pearl-spotted owlet roosting. Not very well concealed in this mango tree, which is fortunate for the photographers in the group. Another bird that's easy to see is Senegal cuckoo, and this is African hoopoe, quite often seen in the drier areas, along with striped kingfisher. Not the most colourful kingfisher, and this is never seen, or should I say, invariably seen away from dry water. These are a species of the dry country. Unlike this bird, a splash of colour with blue-cheeked bee-eater, they're quite often seen along the river. So once again, back for brunch, a late breakfast, and then another walk in the afternoon. And then this is a trip we do currently to Pirang. We do this tour in the morning. The reason why we go south rather than north, there's a lot of roadworks around Serekunda. So places like Abuko are out of bounds at the moment. Otherwise, you're going to spend a couple of hours in the vehicles. So we head to different areas. There's plenty of different places to see in the Gambia. And there's about 10 species in this photo. There's avocet up there, and black-winged stilt down here, greater flamingos, pink-backed pelicans, black herons, and a few others. That's western reef egret that we've seen before, western reef heron, if you prefer. This was a bird only taken last week on a bridge parapet. This is wire-tailed swallow, quite a small swallow, around about the same size as this one, although this is a rufous-chested and or red-chested that doesn't have a white throat, doesn't have tail streamers, but can be confused with both barn swallow and white-tailed, which the white-tailed doesn't always have the white tails either, but it always has that the cap on the adults. Another bird of wetland, and be sure to let you know it's there if you approach. Not even close, they're just like our redshank or a lapwing there. They like to know let you know they're there. This is a spur-winged lapwing, previously known as plover, but all the larger Vanellus lapwings are now called lapwing and not plover. Catches me out sometimes, but I'm now correcting myself. A few woodpeckers, a fine spotted, and cardinal woodpecker, which is one of the smaller woodpeckers in the Gambia. And we might be lucky to see northern white-faced owl. There's a few roost sites that the local guides know of that we can find there during the daytime. Red-billed hornbill, they're quite numerous. African green pigeon, not always easy to see. You wouldn't believe a pigeon would be this colour if you'd not seen any of the African pigeons, but they can be well camouflaged in a tree full of leaves and fruit. African harrier hawk is another bird you're likely to see. We're running over time, so I'll quickly whip through these the next slides. Piapiac, that's the young bird. Coming to the end now, a sunset cruise where we'll see osprey. This was taken last week and it made a splash, as you can see. Broadbill roller often come out in the evenings, and on the way back from the sunset cruise we can often add a species, black-headed heron, African spoonbill, purple heron, And last week we saw this palm-nut vulture. So we're going back for our supper, as this data is. Even on this silhouette picture, you can tell by the little tuft at the back of the head. This is pinkback pelican. Beg your pardon, pelican. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching, and I'll hand you back to Georgie for some questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dave. Another fantastic presentation, really mouth-watering, and lovely to see some really recent footage as well. So that's great. Sorry, I don't know if you can unshare your screen there, Dave, just so we can see all of us. Otherwise, I think I'm getting Alison back, got Ben back. Great. So
I can still see my screen. Can you?
I can see your screen, right? Hang on, I want to try and share my screen. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Lovely. We've lost your video though, Dave. So if you could just bring that back, we'd love to see your face. Okay. So just heading to some questions. So there's a few popped up there, but if you have got any other burning ones, we will try to answer them as quickly as we can. We've also had some through privately, so I'll fire away with those very shortly. So first of all, again, we had a private question in for Oliver from somebody who's interested in joining one of our photo tours, but they're not sure of the level of experience they might need or what kind of equipment they might need. So yeah, if you could just give us a bit of a heads up about that.
Well, to be honest, I'll have anybody with an iPhone through to a mirrorless digital SLR, so it doesn't really matter, to be honest. You can be as basic or as advanced as you want. Yeah, and I will guide you through each step of the way, depending what your objectives and your aims are, really. If you've got a digital SLR, at least that will make a big difference. Something with a lens, for a lot of the African stuff you've seen tonight, because you've got a lot of mammals as well as the birds and the invertebrates and reptiles and things, it's quite a range of different sized species. So, for example, in Madagascar, I was using predominantly 100 to 500 millimeter zoom lens, and then a macro lens for doing some of the small stuff, and a wide angle, of course, for the landscapes and things. So so you don't need too much, to be honest. Certainly for the rainforest, I'm sure Ben may be able to confirm this as well, but for the rainforest or the forest stuff, having a big lens doesn't always work that well, trying to swing it around photographing monkeys and lemurs as much as the birds as well. So sometimes a bit of a zoom can be a real bonus.
Fantastic. Thank you, Oliver. And very early on, we had Richard who was asking about yellow fever certificates. I think his particular question was in reference to Kenya, but actually for Kenya, unless you are arriving from somewhere with a risk of yellow fever, then you shouldn't need to present a yellow fever certificate. So if you're arriving from the UK, you should be absolutely fine. One of the countries where you will need yellow fever certification is for Uganda, where everybody will need that. However, yellow fever vaccinations are not recommended for people over the age of 60. So if you haven't had one before, that won't stop you from going to Uganda or any of these other countries. You'll just need to get an exemption certificate from your doctor or travel nurse, and those are pretty easy to come by, and then you'll be able to go get your visa and enter Uganda fine. And the other thing to just mention on yellow fever certificates is if you've had one more than 10 years ago, then that's absolutely fine. They are now considered valid for life. So your certificate might say it expired a few years ago. That's absolutely fine. You'll still just present that as normal and be able to get through anywhere fine. So yeah, just to clarify that point. Another question we had, there was one for Ben, a really interesting question about the black panther population in Laikipia. Because in other parts of the world, they tend to be in more sort of highly forested, densely forested areas. And they wondered whether it might be something to do with the altitude at Laikipia, or if you've got any thoughts on why they're there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes, it's true that the black leopards appear to make up a higher proportion of the population in rainforest, but also at higher altitude. There is a pattern. I don't think anyone knows exactly why that is. In the rainforest, it probably is partly because that represents better camouflage in this very dark, dense habitat. My guess with higher altitude areas would be that it is to do with thermoregulation, that it's something about uh, yeah, keeping temperature control right. I mean, so certainly with the wild dogs that exist here, they're a lot darker than dogs that you get in hotter parts of Africa. It's quite cool here in Laikipia. It's quite high altitude. So I would guess that's what's going on with the leopards as well to an extent. Again, whether they're hunting more at night than the regular spotted leopards or not, I'm not sure. I would be really interested to find out, because certainly sometimes, I mean, they're very hard to see. I've only seen one once, but certainly when you do see them moving through what's generally a pretty dry, sandy coloured, grassy landscape, they stand out during the day. I mean, they do not look secretive at all. So I can't imagine that it has much kind of camouflage benefit during the day, but maybe at night when they're hunting dicks and other antelope, maybe there is some kind of camouflage benefit, especially if they're using certain micro habitats. But really, I don't think anyone knows for sure. It's a really fascinating question.
Thank you very much, Ben. Another question that we've had is relating to Uganda and the security situation there following the incident a couple of weeks ago. So Len asked about this and sort of the safety of Uganda at the moment. Alison put together a great answer on the chat there, but we've also got a couple of tailor-made guests out there at the moment, and touchwood, so far everything is going very well. We believe that the perpetrators have now been caught, and the security situation they've enhanced security all over the country. So if anything, it's probably safer now than it was before, we feel. We're keeping a constant eye on it, and we're following the FCO advice at all times. I think Alison's group and this group that we've had recently have had to have their itineraries adjusted slightly, just so that we can ensure people's safety. But as with all of our trips, it's something that we're keeping a constant eye on. We'll be following the FCO advice and also the advice of our local partners who've got the most up-to-date knowledge on the ground as well. We listen to them very carefully, and obviously safety is paramount importance on all the trips that we run. So that's just a little update on that. One for Dave now about the Gambia and the amount of walking that's involved on that trip. I think you sort of mentioned boat trips and walking. What kind of fitness level would people need to be joining one of those trips?
Reasonable fitness, but we don't tend to walk that far in one go. Although we might be out for 2 to 3 hours, we are walking at a slow pace. My Steps app last week told me that we were averaging round about 3.5 to 4 miles a day. So if we're walking during the morning, and I beg your pardon, we go out on a canoe in the morning, then we walk in the afternoon, but that's optional. Not everybody joins the walks, and we wait for the temperature to drop. So we normally go out around about 4 o'clock, or that can be as late as 5 o'clock. And if we go out at 5 o'clock, we're back by 6:30, ready for our evening meal. So I would say on average, something like 4 miles a day at tops, 4.5 at tops. But you're bearing in mind, even if it's a grade A walk, the temperatures can be around about the mid-30s, so 30, 35 degrees. So that does have a bearing. Although, we've had people manage it walking with poles and sticks. And I've often broken off from the other guides and stayed with the people that don't want to walk as far. So it's very, very manageable.
Fantastic, thanks, Dave. And I think we've just got one final question that's coming now, just about Uganda for Alison. What would you recommend is the best time of year to visit Uganda with the gorillas? Does it make a difference, particularly for the walking?
It's obviously got some wetter seasons and drier seasons, so we'd recommend avoiding the particularly wet seasons when you're there. The driest season is over our summer period, but that does tend to be a really, really busy time to visit. So generally we tend to go in what you term the shoulder seasons. So it's times where it's still fairly dry in terms of walking, so sort of September, October, November, sort of early November particularly, because rains tend to start later in November. And then sort of January, February time, when it's kind of the worst of the rains have passed, tends to give you the best overall experience, a good amount of wildlife variety, but not too much in the way of rain, and not quite as busy as the peak seasons in the country as well.
That makes sense. Thanks, Alison. So I think, unless I've missed anything that's just popped up here, I think that is pretty much all of our questions for this evening. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you very much, especially to our panelists. Some really fascinating talks this evening. I hope you'll agree. We will be back next Thursday, where we'll be talking about the Indian subcontinent. So please do tune in then. And as mentioned as well, we've got our in-person roadshows that will be kicking off in just a couple of weeks' time. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.